Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this lovely Friday afternoon. Now, I have a bit of a sore throat, but because I'm a true American hero and because I care about all of you, I'm still doing this, so thank me. But aside from all the sarcasm, we actually have a lot of stuff to talk about, and I think rather interesting stuff to talk about this time. So the Rookie of the Year was announced in the WNBA. Obviously, Caitlin Clark ended up winning it, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. She did not win it unanimously for some reason, so we are definitely going to get into that in the first segment. And then in the second segment, there are new reports and new trade rumors around Jimmy Butler claiming that he actually wants to stay on Miami, which is like the first that we've heard. I thought, and many other people thought, that this was going to be Jimmy Butler's last year on Miami, but apparently, at least according to this Bleacher Report article, they say completely different. So we are going to be looking into that and what that could mean. Then in the third segment, James Harden said that he, quote, changed the game and changed the NBA. So we're just going to go ahead and look at exactly how he did that and even if he did that. Excuse me. And then in the fourth segment, we are going to be talking about fantasy basketball trends and sort of like what you if you are going to play fantasy basketball, sort of who should you draft and like how you should draft and what you should be going into in the draft, and like if you're a high pick, if you're a low pick, etc., all of those things. We also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment that I reveal. We have a special fifth segment that I reveal at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that if you're interested. Excuse me. Before I begin, however, I do like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show. Whether you guys have a hot take, a burning question, something you've been dying to share, we are all ears. If you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then you can go ahead and use Super Chat. Just click on the $ below the chat box and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. And your comment is definitely going to get featured on the show if you do. And if Super Chat's not really your thing, that's okay. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the WNBA. And clearly, the Rookie of the Year was going to be Caitlin Clark. I mean, I'm not surprised. I'm sure none of you guys are surprised that Caitlin Clark is the Rookie of the Year. But she was robbed of unanimous Rookie of the Year. She should have won that award unanimously. I believe the voting was, I don't remember exactly what the number was, but I do know that one person voted for Angel Reese. And I'm sorry, but whoever voted for Angel Reese is wrong. And I'm going to say that in the microphone. Whoever voted for Angel Reese is wrong. Like, flat out wrong. There is absolutely no case for Angel Reese winning, getting a singular vote over Caitlin Clark. For starters, Angel Reese didn't even finish the season. She left late in the season due to an injury. And I'm sorry, but like you cannot give the Rookie of the Year to somebody who goes out of the season with an injury compared to someone who has actually been the front runner since she got into the league and has played in a majority of the games. In fact, I believe she played in every single one of the games from the WNBA season. I have to go check that again. But again, there is absolutely no argument for the simple fact that Angel couldn't finish the season. You want more proof that Caitlin should have won it unanimously? For starters, Caitlin actually led the Fever to the postseason. Angel Reese and the Chicago Sky ended up falling out later in the season, while the Fever were actually making a run for it in the postseason. And not in the postseason, but they were making a run for the postseason, excuse me. And excuse me again. So the fact that there's legitimate value that Caitlin brings to the Fever, and Angel Reese did not lead her team to the postseason. So where is the argument for a rookie that leads the team into the postseason compared to a rookie who missed a couple of games, like a couple of the final games, and a rookie who couldn't even lead their team to a winning record? It does not make any sense to me. Like, it really, really, really does not make any sense. And I do have more stats to prove that as well. Hold on just 1 second. I want to go ahead and check the standings and see exactly. Yes, the Sky in the Eastern Conference ranked dead last. Like, dead last in the Eastern Conference, and they were the third worst team in the entire WNBA. That does not indicate value. Like, you can't tell me that Angel Reese deserved a vote over somebody like Caitlin Clark, who, this is one of the craziest stats that we ended up figuring out. Shout out to Jimmy High Roller for doing that. I recommend checking his YouTube channel because he does a lot of graphics for the NBA. He does a lot of hot takes, and again, it's like his videos are really awesome. So I highly recommend watching his videos, as this is where I got the stat from. But Caitlin Clark was responsible for almost half of the Fever's point production. Meaning so the number, I don't remember the exact percentage, but I believe it was around 47% of the points were generated off of Caitlin Clark. Meaning that she scored or assisted on almost half of the Fever's points. Nobody in NBA history, nobody in the NBA has ever had that production throughout an entirety of a season, aside from Luka Doncic. So the fact that the only basketball player that has ever even seen similar production to her, offensively at least, is Luka Doncic, the only one, that is absolutely insane. And again, generating half of the Fever's points. Half of them. Almost half of them. That's an impressive feat in of itself that has never even been accomplished by any WNBA player, period. Not to mention, Caitlin Clark has broken several WNBA records in this season. She was the AP All-WNBA First Team, AP Rookie of the Year unanimously, according to the AP, first WNBA rookie to record 2 triple-doubles, WNBA record for most assists in a season, WNBA record for most threes made by a rookie, most assists in a WNBA game, period, franchise record for most double-doubles in a season, single-season WNBA points for point guard, fastest player to 400 points and 200 assists, fastest player to 500 points and 200 assists, WNBA leader in assists per game, WNBA leader in three-pointers made, first rookie to record 350 points, 100 rebounds, and 150 assists in a season, first player in WNBA history to record at least 20 points, 15 assists, and 5 rebounds in a game, and again, helped lead the Fever to their first postseason appearance in a very, very long time. And there are several other records that Caitlin has broken that I haven't even talked about. Like, I can go on and on with the records that Caitlin has broken. In fact, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that. Why not? Let's see. Caitlin Clark records broken in the WNBA. So in the rookie records, again, she broke the rookie record for points, assists, three-pointers, and she was the first rookie to have two triple-doubles. Single game records, she set the single game record for assists at 19 and became the fastest player to reach 350 and along with 150 assists, as I mentioned before. She also set the Indiana Fever franchise record for most double-doubles and three-pointers in a season. And for the All-Star game, Clark set the WNBA All-Star game record for assists by a rookie with 10. And she also became the first in WNBA history to be named Player of the Month and Rookie of the Month in the same month. She was also named Rookie of the Month 4 times. And in her WNBA debut, she became the WNBA all-time leader in turnovers in her debut in game with 10, which was honestly, like, you know, the only damaging record that she has. I did say I was going to look at her records, and I am looking at all of them. And not to mention, again, all the stuff that she's done in the NCAA division does not count. But Regardless, there is zero argument for Angel Reese, who the only accolade that she has, like, throughout the season was the fact that she had 20 rebounds in like 3 straight games, and she broke the WNBA record for most rebounds in a season. That, compared to everything that I said about Caitlyn, is just that's not a fair comparison whatsoever. So whoever voted for Angel Reese is flat out wrong. Period. Done. No argument about it. And it's really unfortunate that it's like there was clear bias in the voting, in that one voter, I should say, because everyone else voted for Caitlin Clark. It's just that one person who voted for Angel Reese. And it's like she should have won this award unanimously. In the NBA, Victor Wembanyama won the award unanimously. It was a no-brainer for Victor Wembanyama. And similar to how it was a no-brainer for Victor, it should have been a no-brainer for Caitlyn. But of course, we have to constantly divide the fandom, and we have to constantly have these kind of debates that we shouldn't be having. Right now, I should be talking about how she won the unanimous Rookie of the Year and how well-deserved it was, and going over all of her accolades and going over all of the records that she broke. And not to mention in the postseason, but then again, the postseason for the WNBA doesn't count, so like towards Rookie of the Year. So I'm not even going to talk about the postseason. She broke records in the postseason as well, but of course, like, I don't understand. Like, whoever voted for Angel Reese is flat out wrong. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think Angel deserved that one vote? Do you guys think that Caitlyn should have won the award unanimously? And if you guys don't think she should have won the award unanimously, then I'm sorry, but you're wrong. And aside from that, though, we are out of time for this first segment. So now we will go and shift our focus to the NBA, where we talk about Jimmy Butler and the trade rumors surrounding Jimmy Butler. There was a new report and a new article coming in from Bleacher Report, trying to it's claiming that Jimmy Butler wants to stay in Miami. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that right after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, I'm going to be talking about Jimmy Butler and the trade rumors that are sort of surrounding Jimmy Butler, and how there's a new report coming in from Bleacher Report saying that he doesn't want to leave Miami. So we're just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Before I begin, I do like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, something you've been dying to share. We are all ears. If you really want your comment or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. It really helps the show, and it most definitely will get featured on the show. if you do use Super Chat. And also, if you don't use Super Chat, if Super Chat's not really your thing, then that's totally fine. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is gsmcpodcast.net. And you can send in your comments and or donations that way as well. Either or really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And let's go right ahead and talk about Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. Actually, before I do that, I do want to say that there is an NBA preseason game that's going on. Yeah, it is. I called it the season opener, but honestly, like, it's really an NBA opener because, yay, we have NBA basketball, and it's preseason basketball. So the Nuggets, they're matching up against the Celtics, and right now the Nuggets are up 32-28, just letting you guys know. Russell Westbrook scored his first bucket as a Denver Nugget, and guess what? It was a three-pointer. Oh my goodness. But yes, anyways, aside from all of that, Jimmy Butler. Let's focus on Jimmy Butler. So, as you guys know, throughout the offseason, there has been a little bit of tension between, Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. A lot of people were, and myself included, suspected that this would mean that this would be Jimmy Butler's last year, and I personally thought that the Miami Heat should have tried trading him, but it doesn't really seem like that's what's going on. So, according to this article from Bleacher Report, it starts with Miami Heat star Jimmy Butler may be softening his stance about playing out the rest of his current contract before signing a new deal. Now, on the latest episode of the Hoop Collective podcast, ESPN's Brian Windhorst reported that Butler wants to be in Miami, quote, wants to be in Miami, and his goal of getting another contract from the Heat. Now, another quote from Windhorst says, a few things on the Heat. One, as far as I know, I think Jimmy Butler wants to be in Miami. His goal is to get another contract from the Heat. He also, I think, has a player option in his contract, which I think his intention is to probably waive and become a free agent, but he still has that out there. So ESPN's Tim McMahon added additional perspective, saying maybe Jimmy follows through on what he says, like, hey, contract year, this is a prove-it type of year for me, and he's all business. No one questions his ability to play the game and impact winning when he's on the floor. But if you talk to people around the league and say, who's the next big name or star caliber player who gets traded, there are at least some eyes on Jimmy Butler. So there seemed to be some disconnect between Butler and the Heat in the wake of the team's first round playoff loss to the Boston Celtics at the end of the season. And if you guys didn't hear the story, I already talked about this story, but Jimmy Butler, after the Celtics ended up winning in, after the Heat, ended up winning in Game 1, Jimmy Butler was quick to Instagram and started trolling, for lack of a better term. And then a fan recorded him saying that if he was in the game and if he was playing, that the Boston Celtics would lose, and if he was playing, that the Knicks would also lose. And Pat Riley had a lot to say to that, and he addressed that comment in a very blunt manner during the end of the season with, quote, if you're not on the court playing, you should keep your mouth shut, end quote. And quite frankly, that is exactly what Jimmy Butler should have done. I don't agree with what he said. I think it was like, it took a lot of guts to say that in front of the camera, but at the end of the day, that's just incredibly disrespectful. And a lot of people, they like to argue that Jimmy did that for the attention, and a lot of people think that Jimmy Butler loves the attention, and one of the biggest pointers to that is this picture right here. I mean, look at him. That's like around a 34-year-old man dressing up and acting like an emo teenager. And a lot of people think that he's doing that for attention. Personally, I don't care what he does with his hair. I don't care what he tries to do for media day. I don't really care if he's all this and all that. I just like watching good basketball. And he knows how to play some good basketball from time to time. I do think the fans slightly overrate him a little bit in the postseason, but aside from that, he does know how to play. And all of that off-court stuff, I mean, I don't know how I really feel about that. If I was a manager of him, I definitely wouldn't want to be a someone that has to deal with all of that. However, at the end of the day, I feel like I'd have to suck it up because he is producing wins, at least in the postseason. I mean, in the regular season, you can make that argument where it's like he doesn't really take the regular season all that seriously and he really starts trying in the postseason, which is why he gets a lot of the respect and fan appreciation that he does, which really makes no sense in my opinion, but that's besides the point. So as trade rumors started popping up involving Jimmy Butler over the summer, Shams Charania reported that the six-time All-Star would not sign an extension with the Heat or any other team before his opt-out after the 2024-2025 season. So obviously, a lot of questions were going to arise, and a lot of people were going to be like, wait a minute, is this going to be Jimmy Butler's last year? And, excuse me. So for this season, he's owed to be making about like $48.8 million with a $52.4 million player option for the 2025 and 2026 season. He is currently eligible to either sign a one-year $58.6 million extension that would keep his 2025-2026 option intact, or a two-year $112.9 million extension that would void the 2025 and 2026 player option. So the Heat are currently $1.2 million under the second apron, however, this season, and $12.1 million under the second apron. So with Butler's option factored in, I should let you know. Now, even though Jimmy Butler is a fantastic player, his age and durability is really, really concerning, and it might make the Heat reluctant to offer him a full max deal. And he just turned 35 in September 14th, and he's missed 100 games during the first 5 seasons in Miami. And he's averaged 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game in 60 starts last season. The Heat ended up finishing 46-36, earned the 8th seed in the playoffs by defeating the Chicago Bulls in the play-in tournament. And, you know, like, again, this doesn't really, on paper, like, based off of what I just said, that doesn't really sound like a max contract kind of player. Especially since he barely produces in the regular season, but the value from him is mainly in the postseason. However, that's a little bit over-exaggerated, I should say, because yes, he is a pretty good playoff performer, but most of his great playoff performances come in the first round. Last time he made the NBA Finals, I remembered there was a huge drop-off in points and production in every single later round that started in the postseason. So in the first round, he played phenomenally. Then in the second round, he played great. Third round, in the conference finals, he played good, and not even good to mediocre, you can make that argument. And then in the finals, he was bad. So if you noticed, it was a steady trend of just, you know, starting out good, then being a little bit worse, then starting to get even worse, and to the point being really, really bad. So it's like that production in the postseason, and his production in the postseason, at least in my opinion, because of the fact that his performance is constantly kept on hindering as the rounds progressed, I think playoff Jimmy Butler is a little bit overrated. That's just my opinion, however. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think that playoff Jimmy is real? I mean, I know he's real. Like, I know he's real in the first round, but it's like the rounds after that, he's proven that his production is just nowhere near the same as it is in the earlier rounds. And I'm like, I can't say you're a good playoff performer if every single time the lights get brighter, you end up playing a little bit worse. That's just my opinion, however. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. If you guys think that playoff Jimmy Butler is real, and if you guys think that he is a good playoff performer, or maybe you actually agree with me. Again, let me know in the comments. But that's all that I have for this second segment. So now we'll go ahead and go into the third segment where we talk about James Harden and how he feels that he changed the NBA, and we'll talk about that right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be looking at James Harden, and we are going to be asking ourselves, did James Harden change the game? Now, recently, to the media, James Harden, he previously said, quote, that he was one of the players that, actually the quote starts here, quote, the NBA had to adjust to, end quote. And let me just go ahead and see exactly what this article is saying. So his skills and techniques have made a significant impact on the league and on media day, and well, not on media day, but to the media, he said, I'm one of the people that the NBA had to adjust to. And to that, I say yeah. Yeah, he definitely impacted the league in a lot of ways that most of them, in my opinion, were a little bit negatively, but still, he did in fact change the NBA. And for starters, he's nowhere near the same player that he was on Houston, but he most definitely, when he was on Houston, changed the game. And I do actually have some examples of that. So here is the funniest example that I have right here. So as you can see, this is Josh Hart guarding James Harden. Now, if you notice, Josh Hart is guarding him, but with his hands behind his back. That usually never happens for any NBA player. Like, there is not a single NBA player that defends anyone like this. And the reason why the Lakers were resorting to this was because, like, the Houston Rockets were getting to the free throw line a lot. And that was part of James Harden's game. Just the fact that he was able to get to the line so easily, and that it was just almost impossible to guard Harden, because if you play him real tight, he's going to blow right by you. And chances are he's either going to make the layup or he's going to do his signature arm hook, where he sort of grabs your arm and then flails his body around like this and then gets to the line. And that results in 2 free throws for Harden. Not to mention, if you play back on him a little bit in Houston, you are also victim to his lethal step back and his double step back, which at times people think was a travel. But I mean, James Harden, with that skill set and with those moves, it really made it difficult for people to guard him, because it's like, okay, what is he going to do now? Is he going to drive to the paint and get a foul? Or is he going to take a step back and just hit the 3 in my face? And it's like, it really caused a lot of people to be confused in exactly how to guard him. Some instances, they were guarding him like this, literally just cutting off the step back entirely and forcing him to use his non-dominant hand. Problem is, James Harden is just so elite at the point guard position and so good at basketball that he can still drive right. But he is giving him the lane over here. He wants him to drive to the basket. And again, that's when you're guarding James Harden, that's really not ideal. And another funny thing that I remember about prime James Harden was Ricky Rubio. He, instead of guarding him in front, he guarded him from the back. Like, Ricky Rubio wasn't even in front of James Harden. He was behind James Harden trying to guard him. And it's like he had the league so confused. And so everybody was just like, how do you guard this man? And then eventually the NBA changed and they introduced this new rule. Now, a lot of people think that I will say that James Harden did have a lot of influence in this rule, and like his style of play definitely affected the implications of this rule, and definitely was an inspiration for this new rule that the NBA put out. They put out this new rule actually a while ago when James Harden went to Philly, I believe. But however, I call it the Trae Young / Luka Doncic rule. Now, what does that mean? So, in a couple of seasons ago, Trae Young, he'd have this signature move that would always get him to the free throw line. And Luka Doncic had this same move too. So essentially what they would do is Trae Young there would be a screen, right? So the screen is here, Trae Young comes around the screen, and defenders usually, when they do have a rim protector, they try to avoid switches, right? And so that would mean that the defender that is being screened right here would have to go around the screen and try to catch up to Trae Young. Once he sees that the defender is going around the screen and trying to contest him, Trae Young, what he would do is he would stop moving and he would try to get his defender crabbed behind him. And once he gets like around the free throw line, what he does is he'll jump into the defender that is behind him and then flail his body like that and then get a foul. And it would result in 2 free throws 9 out of 10 times. And people were seeing this, and obviously people would be very, very, very upset because in that instance, what is the defender supposed to do? The defender is behind Trae Young, Luka Doncic, or even James Harden, who even does this move. The defender is essentially Trae Young has an open shot since the defender is behind him. But instead of taking the open shot, he just jumps into the defender that's behind him and flails his body and gets rewarded for a foul, which makes 0 sense. And at that point, it's obvious that Trae Young / Luka isn't aiming to score. They're aiming to draw a foul. And so then the NBA came in and they changed that. So, excuse me, when a player does a quote-unquote, and I say quote-unquote because the interpretation of this term is an umbrella term. Whenever a defender does an offensive player does a non-basketball move, then the ref isn't going to call the foul on that. So, meaning that if Trae Young were to try and do the thing that I just said, where he jumps into the defender and he flails his body, and sometimes the defender doesn't even have to be behind him. The defender can be in front of him too. He'll pump fake and then he'll jump into the defender and then try to draw the foul. So when the ref sees that and interprets that as a non-basketball move, there's not going to be a foul called. And this is one of the big reasons why James Harden has sort of slowed down, I think. On top of just not being the same explosive player that he was, but he hasn't really been able to get to the line nearly as much as he was on Houston. And there's some debate that, sometimes the refs don't actually do call the fouls and actually don't even remember the rule. But again, it's down to interpretation because realistically, what is a non-basketball move? To me, a non-basketball move is a move where you aren't trying to score. You are not trying to put the ball in the hoop. That, to me, is a non-basketball move. Because if you're looking to draw a foul, you are not playing. To me, you are not playing basketball. It's a difference between pump faking and trying to go up strong when the defender is in the air. That's a completely different thing. And going up strong when there's 2 people in front of you, that is a completely different thing. But doing this to try and get a call and falling to the ground to try to get a call, a non-basketball move in my opinion. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of players that do this and a lot of players that do that and a lot of players that do this every single time, and it's really annoying. And for those of you guys who are on the audio side, you aren't seeing it, but I am flailing my body like how James Harden would flail his body trying to draw a foul, or how Joel Embiid would try to draw a foul as well. It's really again, it's, in my opinion, that's a non-basketball move. But the refs might interpret a non-basketball move differently. Maybe they think that drawing a foul is actually part of the game, and it is a basketball move to try and do that and to try to reward your team with points. Again, it's down to perception and it's down to opinions. So that's one of the reasons why it gets called. But like recently, like in the first year when this rule was implemented, it was we noticed a huge difference in how the refs were actually officiating some of the games. And that's sort of, you can make the argument that it sort of wavered a little bit. But the main point was, yes, James Harden did in fact change the game. And whether he changed it for the better, whether he changed it for the worse, that's down to your interpretation. But again, there has never been a single NBA player in my entire that I've ever seen get guarded like this, get guarded like this, and get guarded like this. Never seen that before. And the reason why people were doing that was because that James Harden was just so difficult to guard that nobody knew how to guard him. It's just like you had to get lucky. Like, that's really how it was. You had to hope and pray that he was having an off night and that he just couldn't hit his three-pointers. If he was having an off day, then maybe you had a chance of winning the game. But he still was able to get to the line, and he still was able to drop at least 20 points. I remember one of the funniest stats that I saw was the fact that James Harden, he was shooting horribly from the field, but he ended up taking 25 free throws, and so ended the game with like over 25 points, despite the fact that he shot poorly, which was very, very funny. But again, yes, James Harden changed the game. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, whether James Harden changed the game or whether he didn't. But now we're going to go ahead and go into the fourth segment where I talk about fantasy basketball and some fantasy basketball trends, who I feel you should draft, and what you should do, like looking for when you're looking for players in fantasy. So I'll be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be looking at some fantasy basketball trends and some of the four huge draft trends that you need to know about for this season, at least, according to ESPN. And I'm going to weigh in my own opinions on it as well. And this was an article made by Steve Alexander. Steve, that's a funny name. And obviously, when you're drafting a player and when you're drafting a player in fantasy, there are a lot of things that you have to consider. Fantasy is all about production. So you have to pick the players that you feel are going to bring the most production to a team, both offensively and defensively. That's how I look at it. So this article starts off by saying if you get a top 4 pick or go last. And essentially those top 4 picks, at least according to this article, are Victor Wembanyama, Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, and SGA. And to that, I say yes, those players are fantastic picks in fantasy. And if you can get Nikola Jokic or Luka Doncic, you should definitely try to do that. And a lot of people are expecting a breakout year for Victor. So it might be a little bit of a risk, but I do think that Victor is a very solid option to pick. And as well as SGA. However, I do feel like Giannis Antetokounmpo is a very, very, very solid option to pick up as a high pick. Giannis Antetokounmpo can do everything on the court in terms of production, in terms of efficiency, as well as defense, which is also a very important thing in fantasy. He can produce a lot for your team. He did produce a lot for his team in the previous season, so he most definitely is a very solid pick. And I could even make the argument that I'd pick him over SGA. However, SGA's consistency on offense is staggering. It's like he drops 31 points in every single game. But the reason why I would pick Giannis over SGA is because, yes, SGA can drop 31 points every single game, but Giannis can drop 30 points and get 10 rebounds and also get 5 or 6 assists along with that and maybe a couple of blocks as well. So those are a lot of things that help you in fantasy. So don't be afraid to pick somebody like Giannis Antetokounmpo. Or even maybe, it was a risk, but I did it last year. I drafted both LeBron and Anthony Davis, and that worked out phenomenally for me. Oh my gosh, my fantasy team last year was ridiculous, and it was very risky. Scotty Barnes straight was a fantastic surprise up until he got hurt, and every other player that I had on the roster, they were able to produce just fine. And even LeBron and Anthony Davis, they were producing at a staggering rate that a lot of people didn't really expect. A lot of people thought, last year at least, when I was drafting, oh, you drafted Anthony Davis, he's going to get hurt. Oh, you drafted LeBron, he's going to get hurt. Oops. But yeah, so Victor Wembanyama, Jokic, Luka, SGA, Giannis Antetokounmpo, those should be the players that you should be searching for if you have a high pick in this draft. And if you can't get any of those players, then you should go last. And you should go last because then you'll start off round 2 with the first pick. So then you can take back-to-back players, which I think is a little bit smarter. So in ESPN's latest mock draft, 8 teams points head-to-head, according to the Steve, the writer of the article. Pau Gasol, what's going on? How have you been? Nice to see you in the chat. Because there are only 8 of the people on Steve's fantasy, he turned and got Scotty Barnes at the end of round 2, which is honestly a fantastic pick. I would have picked Scotty Barnes as well. And then was able to scoop up Kevin Durant with the first pick of round 3. So getting that back-to-back option after by being last in a round is very, very useful and very underrated. So definitely should think about doing that if you cannot get one of the top 5 players that I just listed. Again, the 5 players: Luka Doncic, Victor Wembanyama, Nikola Jokic, SGA, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Now, point guards. A lot of people, they really think that getting a point guard is necessary and getting assists isn't easy to come by. And to that, I say no. Don't bother drafting a point guard early into the round. Try getting other good players at other positions like Sabonis. I had Sabonis, and oh my goodness, his production, his double-doubles were absolutely fantastic. And I benefited more from acquiring bigger players and players that can produce on other sides of the ball that aren't just on the offense, and players that can also get pretty good stats and stuff the stats. And I saved the later rounds for getting a point guard. Again, you don't necessarily need to have a point guard, especially now in today's NBA, because there are so many small forwards and so many forwards in the NBA that can also stack up assists arguably better than point guards. I mean, there's obviously a select few number of point guards that don't get that many assists. I mean, Trae Young is definitely one of those players that gets a lot of assists, but I wouldn't personally draft him, and mainly because of the defensive struggles and his inconsistencies. And there are small forwards that get more assists than Steph Curry in a game. So really, you don't necessarily need to pick a point guard early. Point guards are still going to be available late in the round. And I also think Scoot is going to be heading for a pretty nice breakout season this year. So he was averaging 19, 3, and 9, 1 steal, and 2.9 threes in his 7 April games. So he could really be due for a fantastic season coming up. So just keep that in mind. And also another thing, if you are thinking of getting a point guard, Chris Paul is going to be a pretty underrated option in my opinion. Having Victor Wembanyama to throw lobs to, I mean, that is probably easy 10 assist games right there for Chris Paul. Easy 10 assist games in my opinion. So definitely consider drafting that. Now, in addition to point guards, there are also pretty solid centers that can bring some decent production as well. Jalen Duren is a solid center. Daniel Gafford, Brooke Lopez, DeAndre Ayton, Derek Lively II. All of those players are fantastic options at the center and pretty solid options because they can get you the points production and they could also get you the rebounds that you need. Not to mention, I also think Chet Holmgren is a pretty good taker as well. I think he's due for a step up in this season, and he was pretty good last season, but sort of fell off since Victor Wembanyama is Victor Wembanyama. But also, Reed gets a big boost with Karl Anthony Towns wearing a Knicks jersey as well. And I love the idea of grabbing Reed late in the drafts, and so does Steve over here. Now, let's see, what else does what other trends does Steve have? So it can be tricky, however, finding a rather, a solid small forward because in the first few rounds of your draft, because you have Jalen Williams, there's even Jaylen Brown, there's even Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Jalen Johnson, Mikal Bridges, Miles Bridges, Kuzma, and Franz Wagner. There are so many late picks that you could pick. I wouldn't draft Kawhi Leonard, mainly because he's going to be injured. Same thing with Paul George. I don't really have that much faith in Paul George. I'd actually pick Jaylen Brown if I was to pick anybody on this list, as well as Jalen Williams. So Jaylen Brown and Jalen Williams are a very solid late pick in the NBA, in the fantasy draft, that most likely people aren't going to even think of getting Jaylen Brown because they're going to think Jason Tatum. And he's just going to sort of get swept under the rug, I think, in some of these drafts. But if you can get Jaylen Brown, you have a very solid option at the small forward that comes off the bench. And, excuse me. Now, a question that a lot of people have, however, is in fantasy, who should you draft? Should you draft Jokic at number 1 or Victor at number 1? To that, I say Jokic. Easily, if you have the first pick in the draft, you have to get Jokic. Absolute must. You have to get him. Because Jokic is a triple-double machine. His production, his efficiency, his offense, his ability to get rebounds and assists simultaneously is one of the most valuable things in fantasy basketball. Which is why I also say to get Giannis Antetokounmpo, because he could also do similar things to Nikola Jokic. Just can't really rack up the assist all that much, but he does have it in defense. He makes up for it on the defensive end. However, Jokic's offense is way more consistent than a player's defense because defensive stats are calculated with steals and blocks. And sometimes there are going to be games where Giannis isn't going to get a block or a steal. But there are going to be several games where Jokic gets 26, 10 plus, and 9 plus assists, which ultimately would benefit you more than Giannis Antetokounmpo. So Giannis still in the top 5, but if you have the number 1 pick, you have to absolutely grab Nikola Jokic. And another thing, one thing that makes Victor Wembanyama so valuable is the fact that he averages so many blocks. I think now teams are going to be way more cautious about going into the paint with Victor. We saw that in his rookie year where Christian Braun, he literally was in front of the basket, Victor was behind him, and he did not even attempt to go for the layup because he felt that Victor was going to get that chase down. So really, it's a very solid pick. But again, you have to there's a little bit of luck involved with the shot selection that the other team is willing to take on you. And now that everybody knows that you are a well-respected shot blocker, the chances of people going up on you are probably going to be rather slim, especially since he is 7'4". But excuse me. That's what I have, and those are my opinions. So let's see, everybody else, according to this article at least, they all say that you should draft Nikola Jokic at number 1. And there's really no argument for not picking Jokic at number 1. He should definitely be at number 1. So those are some of the fantasy basketball trends. I hope that helps you guys out in your draft success. Again, you got the number 1 pick, get Jokic. If you have a top 5 pick, that's fine. You do have options. If you don't have a top 5 pick, then give up your pick and go last so that way you can go back-to-back for players and get a pretty solid option. That's step number one. And what was step number two? I completely forgot what was step number two. Just remember to draft the players that can produce, that can fill up the box scores, and do it consistently. Because that's really like, don't get stat patters, however. You want to get players that naturally fill up the box scores. Like Nikola Jokic, he naturally fills up the box scores. Giannis Antetokounmpo, he naturally fills up the box scores. Like, the big man position is going to be your friend in a lot of the fantasy drafts. Try to get small forwards that can also accumulate a lot of rebounds. One of the more underrated options, now that I think about it, aside from Tatum, is Paolo Banchero. Honestly, if you vote for him, or not vote for him, excuse me, if you draft him in the later rounds of the draft, that's a pretty solid pick. That's really a very solid pick, because now I feel like he's going to get better, and not only is his rebounding going to get better, his assists are also going to get better, along with his point production. So Paolo Banchero is a very solid option, and I'd actually pick Paolo over somebody like Paul George and somebody like Kawhi Leonard going into this season as well. So just keep those things in mind. Players that can produce efficiently, and players that can play defense. Like, that is a very, very, and remember, efficiency is also very important. So that's all that I have for fantasy basketball, for all of my fantasy basketball fans. And with that out of the way, we can go ahead and go into the fifth and the final segment, where I talk about the WNBA playoff games that are set to start, that are set to go on later tonight. So I'll be talking about that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth and the final segments of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, we are going to be talking about the WNBA and the postseason games that are going to be going on later today. So, just a little bit of a reminder of how the seasons are, like how the series is right now for each of the playoff series and the semifinals. So the Lynx, they're scheduled to play the Connecticut Sun, and right now this series right here, is tied at 1-1. However, Connecticut has 2 home games that they get to play, assuming that they have 2 home games that they have to play, and depending on the results of the home games could actually determine the result of the season. So Connecticut could close out. They could close out the season, and they could close out Minnesota in these 2 home games. Since they managed to steal a game from Minnesota, they stole game 1, and then Minnesota ended up bouncing back and won game 2. But right now, this is actually like a perfect trajectory for the Connecticut Sun to close out this series, because again, the 2 home games, having home field advantage is massive, especially here in Connecticut, because Connecticut is home to a lot of good women's sports teams. I mean, not the Sun for one, but also UConn women's basketball is just fantastic, and also gets a lot of recognition from not just the media but a lot of students as well. And of course, the men's basketball team is also rather solid, but still, the Connecticut Sun, if they end up winning the WNBA finals, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people here, especially at the school, are going to like rejoice and be like, "Yay, they did it!" You know, and they do have a very, very solid option to be able to do that. It's a very, very close bet. They do have it in the bag. Now, the Liberty, however, and against the Aces. Now, the Liberty, they're up 2-0 against the Aces. However, the Aces also have the 2 home games, so they could play in game 3, and then they could win it and extend the series and possibly even tie the series to force a game 5. However, all the Liberty needs is one good game. All they need is to have one good game collectively, and they can win. Now, the problem, obviously, for the Liberty is going into hostile territory, especially in Vegas. You guys know how I feel about Vegas, and you guys know how I feel about, having a team there. But still, like, going into an away crowd with the momentum behind you is not necessarily ideal, because I feel like the crowd is going to get a little bit more into it than they normally would to try and help their team win a game in the series. And if they end up sweeping the Aces, this is going to really affect the legacy of Sabrina Ionescu, Brenna Stewart, and also Aja Wilson, who just recently came out complaining, but I'm not going to talk about that. But at the end of the day, the Liberty, they're going to play the Aces at 9:30 p.m., and the Lynx are going to play against the Sun at 7:30 p.m. I'm pretty sure one of my teacher is going to go to the Connecticut Sun game because he's a really big fan of sports and women's sports as well. So definitely, I honestly hope that I see him on TV, so that way I could just go ahead and snap a picture of him and be like, "Oh my God, that's you!" That would be so funny. But again, this series, it's starting to shape up. This is really like starting to shape up the more competitive series between these two. I think the Liberty are easily going to close out the Aces. Honestly, I think they're easily going to close them out. In whether they lose the first game, that's honestly fine. They do have another game. However, it's important to note that the Liberty should not go into the game with that mentality. They should go into the game with the mentality that they're going to close out right now, and not the lame mentality of, "Oh, okay, it's okay that we didn't close out. There's still the next game." No, because the minute you let up and the minute you do that, that is when you lose the series, and that is when you blow a 2-0 lead. And that is something that you absolutely cannot afford to do. You cannot do that if you are the Liberty. You got to go into this game thinking you are going to win. You got to go into there knowing that you're going to win, because the Aces right now, they have nothing left to lose. They're going to be playing their hearts out, and they are going to be trying their best to get this win. And now for Connecticut and Minnesota, Connecticut needs to go into this game thinking that they are going to take advantage of both of these home games and that they're going to close out the series as well. And I think Minnesota should go into the game thinking we have to steal this game so that we have a chance of winning the series in the final game. Because if they are able to steal a game, then that would mean that, they'll be up 2-1. They can afford to lose the final game, and not the final game. They could afford to lose game 4 and then play at home. But actually, I scratch that. I don't think they should go into that mentality at all, because I just remembered that the Connecticut Sun ended up beating them at home. So Minnesota, they have to try and steal at least one game, and if they can steal 2, then that's all the power to them. But the reality, both of these teams, they have to go into all of these, both of this team and this team, they have to go all in or go all out. This one as well, you can make the argument that they also have to go all in, because they do have the home court advantage, and they have to take advantage of that home court advantage. I said advantage a lot there, I understand. Now, the Liberty, they just cannot let up, and they just cannot choke. That's really their mentality. Like, that's going to be their thought process going into this game. So, who do I have winning the games for today? I think the Connecticut Sun are going to win and make the series 2-1, and I think the Liberty are going to sweep. And I hope the Liberty sweep, honestly. I genuinely hope that the Liberty sweep, because after Angel Wilson's comments, not a big fan of her. She's a fantastic player, just not a big fan. anymore. Not as big of a fan as I want to be. I'm still going to give her the respect that she deserves because let's face it, she is a phenomenal athlete and a great WNBA player. The best WNBA player in the league right now, without a doubt. I mean, she has a statue for crying out loud and she's still playing, which speaks in of itself. But her comments have sort of, again, not a big fan. And I'm not going to address those comments because they're not important. Just not a fan. My opinion. If you guys have a different opinion, then that's okay. We can have our opinions. But that is all that I have on this podcast for today, and that's all for the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates as well. As usual, please remember that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show. Whether you guys have a hot take, burning question, we're all ears. Please remember to go ahead and use Super Chat. Just click on the $ below the chat box, send in your comments and or donations that way, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. Or you can use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or helps the show, makes it much more interactive. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and watch the NBA preseason game right now because that's shaping up to be... Let's actually go ahead and look at the score real quick before I cap it off. So right now it is the start of the third quarter and the Nuggets are up 70-61 against the Boston Celtics. Yes, it is shaping up. I am turning out to be right. So I recommend tuning into that. I mean, it's NBA basketball. I don't care if it's the preseason. It's still basketball and I love it. So that's all that I have today on this podcast. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired.